Yeah, I certainly am, Iman, and it's, you're right, very important conversation to have here. So why don't we talk to a person who led the conversations around the energy mix and the just energy transition here. So we turn that focus from infrastructure, industrial value chains, all of those to financing and economic stability. We had the B20 take place before the G20, and it has made recommendations to government, to the G20, that could ultimately shape development and energy access across the continent. Let's speak to the chair of the Nedbank Group. That's Daniel Mminele, who joins us now. So, as I said, the chair of the B20 Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force. Daniel, I thought we'd see each other in studio. This is unfair. I thought you were traveling a lot and you were ready to see us here in studio as well. I hope you're well.
I'm very well. Good morning to you, Arabile, and good morning to Newzroom Afrika. I saw you yesterday at the B20 summit, but unfortunately with other commitments we've had to do this one. So next time.
Yeah, certainly. We certainly are hoping so. Look, let's briefly just talk about this task force. And even through some of these recommendations, everybody's just wondering why South Africa has to play such a key role, or why even the global South needs to play such a key role in this just transition and the energy mix. How exactly do we play a role?
Look, I mean, the first point to make, Arabile, in terms of South Africa, us as a country as such, we have obviously been given, with the leadership of the G20, as a country, an opportunity to provide global leadership. As has been said many times, the first African nation to chair the G20 at leaders level. This is far more than just sort of a ceremonial moment, which with all the flurry going on at the moment, one might get that impression. It's a very rare opportunity for us, which comes with leadership responsibility to reshape a global governance, to amplify the African voice and position the global South as a meaningful partner in international decision-making. So it's a very, very important one. With regard to the task team that I had the privilege to chair, while of course the agenda of the B20 overall spans sort of multiple themes, the Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force, if you wish, sits at the intersection of climate ambition, of industrialization and inclusive growth. It's really about how do we design an energy mix and just transitions that strike a balance between sustainability, energy access, energy security, and inclusive growth. So what we try to do is to translate these broader sort of themes and forces into actionable pathways that we're spanning 3 recommendations that we make. And we were very deliberate to try and ensure that what we put forward is concrete, it's precise, and it's pragmatic, and thus actionable, and more critically investable.
Making it investable means that you have the buy-in of quite a few nations when it comes to this too then, because they all would agree that there's a way to do it. We so speak about that $1.3 trillion access to fund that is made available for nations in the just energy transition. How does that translate though? Because one asks, is it just on a single basis need? Do you know how the conversations are had, not just around that funding, but in funding in general?
Look, Arbil, I think the amount you're referring to, I guess, talks to the South African JETP investment plan, which is sort of part of what, in the bigger scheme of things, we would describe as a sort of a country platform. And we talked to that in the policy paper that we put forward around institutionalizing these country platforms, making sure that as we transition, we make sure that the processes, the projects, and the transitions are country-owned and country-led and speak to specific circumstances of the respective countries. But the bigger issue here is about exactly what you're speaking to, approaching this in a more holistic and more integrated way. And you will see with the 3 recommendations that we put forward, they very much speak to each other in that way. So it's not just about decarbonizing, not just about reducing emissions. It's trying to use this to help move forward industrialization, help promote trade and investment, innovation, digitization in the process, that as you transition, you seek to address also some of the systemic challenges that countries are facing. But the biggest hurdle and challenge at the moment is finance. We need to raise finance at scale, at affordable cost, and urgently, and make sure that it gets directed to where it is most needed and where it's going to be most impactful. So it needs to be predictable, it needs to be affordable. We say it needs to be de-risked, which means that we have to find ways of leveraging what are limited public sector resources to crowd in private sector capital and tap into those much larger pools. And just to give you a sense of the kind of magnitude around this finance, emerging markets require around 2.4 trillion per year by 2030 for the transition. And at this current point in time, only a fraction is flowing, and that is due to high costs of capital, and the gaps mean that projects that potentially should be accelerated, should be implemented, are typically left on the table. The other recommendations that we have talk to industrialization. Picking up on what I've just said now, how do we make sure that as part of the process, we move, for instance, from extraction to beneficiation to value creation, because a lot of the value actually bypasses emerging markets in Africa in particular. If you think about critical minerals that are so important for this transition, 60–70% of them are in emerging markets and developing economies, 30 of them in the African continent. So very important on that industrialization, that we create new jobs and skills. And we think overall, as we put in the paper, that the energy and the transition value chain overall is an opportunity that can unlock by 2040 up to 11 trillion. And lastly, the last recommendations around infrastructure. We need to modernize infrastructure, invest in transmission and grid system, battery storage systems to make sure that this is sustainable.
You make two relevant points, really, that I thought were of keen focus. I'm going to ask both in one, because the one, you spoke about the funding. You were concerned because there's only a fraction of the funding needed, particularly for African countries, in order to get the just transition correct by around 2030 or so, at the very least at this moment. So then the question becomes, how confident are you that this transition will actually be investable and just on the one end? On the other end, you then talk about Africa being the player where all the critical minerals primarily are. Or, I mean, of course, you've got the likes of China, but you've got so many critical minerals on the continent. We don't seem to get critical value out of it. So we're giving, but we're not receiving. How do we play a more pivotal role there?
Arabile, I come away from the work of this year, including what we heard yesterday at the conclusion of the B20, you're quite optimistic in a sense that the discussions that we've been having and the work that we've been undertaking are moving us definitely in the right direction to make sure that we start tackling some of the frictions that, obviously you allude to in terms of being responsible for the progress hitherto being fairly slow. So I think we're getting to a position where there's going to be, and there's starting to be, better alignment between things like policy certainty, risk sharing in terms of the respective roles that people have to play, things like the de-risking that I spoke about earlier, and scaling tools like blended finance and so forth, and a sort of a local capability. So I think that we've got a good chance. The key issue is for us to collaborate, to align our actions, because each and everyone can do things that might help in an incremental way get us forward, but is the collective action that is the unlocking mechanism which will get us to certain, if you wish, tipping points that then kickstart processes that are self-reinforcing in terms of raising finance, in terms of trade and investment, innovation, creating jobs, and making sure that we've got a sustainable growth that is inclusive.
Daniel, so important to have this conversation. Many people asking the question as to why we need to play any role at all. And I suppose it's this kind of conversation that needs to happen. It's the solutions and the actual action that comes out of it that will also be followed. Daniel Mminele, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. The group chairman of Nedbank joining us for it, but also the chair of the B20's Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force.